The lobby of the Grand Royal Hotel was a temple to quiet money. Sunlight, filtered through towering windows, fell in perfect rectangles on marble floors so polished they looked like still water. The air smelled of lemonwood cleaner and white lily arranged in crystal vases. People moved through the space with a hushed purpose, the click of heels and the murmur of low conversations blending into a soft, expensive hum. At the center of this perfect world was Elias Vance, the hotel manager. He stood near the concierge desk, a statue of impeccable control in a tailored navy suit. His eyes, a cool gray, didn't just see the lobby. They scanned it. They noted a waiter adjusting a crooked rose in a centerpiece. They clocked their guest waiting a fraction of a second too long for a pen. For Elias, order was not just a preference. It was the product he sold. And today, like every day, the order was absolute. His gaze, however, kept drifting back to one particular guest. The man had checked in an hour ago. He was alone, carrying a single, worn leather suitcase that had seen better decades. His clothes were clean but simple. A beige cable-knit sweater, dark trousers, shoes that were sturdy but not stylish. He had given his name as Leo. No company affiliation, no requests for the executive lounge. He'd paid with a card that didn't have a famous bank's logo on it. To Elias's practiced eye, Leo was a puzzle solved instantly. A budget traveler, maybe a teacher or a low-level academic, cashing in loyalty points for a single night of unaccustomed luxury. He didn't belong. What intrigued Elias, almost annoyed him, was where the man had chosen to sit. In the lounge area, right beside the hotel's crown jewel, the concert grand piano. It was a magnificent Steinway, its ebony surface a lake of midnight reflecting the chandeliers. A small, elegant sign on the closed lid read, "Please admire. For certified artists only." It was a piece of art, a statement, and a very expensive liability. Leo wasn't admiring it like the others. Others took pictures, pointed, kept a respectful distance. Leo simply sat in the armchair beside it, sipping a glass of water, and his eyes rested on the instrument with a strange familiarity. It wasn't the wide-eyed wonder of a tourist. It was the look of someone recognizing an old friend in a crowd. He studied the curve of its side, the gleam of the gold lettering, the way the light caught the polished petals. Once he leaned forward slightly, as if listening for something. Elias felt a prickling at the back of his neck. This was a man who saw a piano, not a prop. The afternoon drifted on. Elias dealt with 1,000 small things, a complaint about pillow firmness, a logistics call for tomorrow's wine tasting, a review of the evening's turned-down amenities. Through it all, part of his attention remained fixed on the man by the piano. Leo was peaceful, almost still. He read a book, a thick paperback with no flashy cover. He watched people come and go, his expression unreadable. He seemed entirely comfortable in his silence, which, in the noisy world of the luxury hotel, made him strangely conspicuous. As evening approached, the lobby's energy shifted. The check-in rush subsided. The after-work cocktail crowd hadn't yet arrived. That magical, quiet hour settled in, where the light turned golden and the sound softened. The pianist who played during tea time had packed up and left. The Steinway sat silent, a sleeping giant. It was in this lull that Leo moved. Elias was reviewing a reservation on his tablet when he saw it from the corner of his eye. Leo had placed his book down. He stood up, not with any suddenness, but with a slow, natural grace. He took the 3 steps to the piano. For a long moment, he just stood beside it, his hand not touching the wood. Then he did something that made Elias's blood run cold. He reached out and with a single finger gently lifted the small locking clasp on the fallboard, the cover for the keys. It opened with a soft, precise click. Elias straightened up, his professional smile freezing into a grim line. This was the line. This was the rule. Guests did not touch the Steinway. Leo didn't seem to hear the unspoken rule. He was in his own world. He looked at the row of white and black keys, a landscape of possibility. His right hand hovered over them. He was not smiling. His face was serious intent. Then he extended his index finger, not to play a chord, not to bang a key. He gently pressed down on middle C dot. The note rang out. It was a single, pure tone. It hung in the quiet lobby air, vibrant and clear, seeming to cleanse the silence rather than break it. Leo tilted his head, listening to the sound decay, absorbing its quality, its pitch, its soul. A faint, almost invisible nod of approval passed over his features. It was the look of a master checking his tools. That single note was the trigger for Elias. The spell was broken. This was no longer an observation. It was an infringement, a violation of the hotel's standards. This unassuming man in his simple sweater was laying a finger on a $250,000 instrument. The image was an offense to Elias's entire sense of order. He moved. His steps were quick and sharp, each heel strike on the marble a punctuation mark of his rising anger. He wove through the low tables and armchairs, his eyes locked on the man at the piano. A few remaining guests in the lounge looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The manager's storm cloud approached. Leo heard the footsteps. He slowly turned, his hand retreating from the keyboard, the fallboard still open. He saw Elias's face, not the polite, welcoming mask of the manager, but the tight, displeased expression of authority challenged. Elias stopped a few feet away, his voice cutting through the lingering resonance of the single piano note. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, designed to carry, to chastise. "Sir," the word was an ice cube. Leo met his gaze, calm, waiting. "The piano," Elias continued, his tone dripping with the condescension he made no effort to hide. "It is not for guests to touch. It is not a toy." He gestured vaguely at the instrument, as if Leo might not understand what he was referring to. "This is a very valuable piece. A Steinway concert grand. Do you understand?" Leo's expression remained placid. "I apologize," he said, his voice quiet, gravelly from disuse. "I was just appreciating its tone. It's a fine instrument." The apology, so simple and genuine, should have ended it. But for Elias, it was fuel. The man's calm was infuriating. He hadn't jumped back in guilt. He hadn't stammered. He had appreciated its tone. The arrogance of it, from a man dressed like that. Elias took a half-step closer, his voice dropping into a zone that was somehow more public, more performative. He was no longer just speaking to Leo. He was making an example for the now watching lobby. Appreciating is done with the eyes, sir, not the hands. This is what we call a hard piano. It's for real artists, professionals. He let the word real hang in the air, a clear distinction between the person before him and the caliber of individual the piano deserved. It requires a certain touch, one that amateurs simply do not possess. He saw a flicker in Leo's eyes then. Not anger. Something deeper, sadder. It looked like disappointment. But Elias was riding a wave of self-righteousness. He wanted to drive the point home, to seal this lesson with a flourish that would leave no doubt. He pointed a stiff, authoritative finger at the space on the pristine marble floor, directly between them. His voice rose slightly, clear and crisp for a small audience. "Let me be perfectly clear. If anyone like you, can actually play this thing properly, if you can show me you're a real artist." He paused for dramatic effect, his lips curling into a thin, mocking smile. "Then I will kneel. Right here." He tapped the toe of his polished shoe on the spot. "I will kneel right here on this floor." The silence that followed was absolute. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. The guests watching were utterly still, some embarrassed, some fascinated by the car crash of social interaction unfolding. Leo looked from Elias's pointed finger to his face. The disappointment in his eyes had crystallized into something else, a profound, weary understanding. He looked at the manager not as a man to be fought, but as a specimen of a sad, small world. He gave one slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't acceptance of the challenge. It was an acknowledgement of the statement itself, of the ugliness it represented. Without a word, he reached forward and gently closed the fallboard over the keys. The soft thud was the only sound. He turned, walked back to his armchair, picked up his worn suitcase and his book. Then he walked past Elias without a glance, heading toward the bank of elevators. Elias stood frozen, his finger still half pointing at the empty spot on the floor. The adrenaline of his performance began to recede, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling behind. He had won. He had enforced the rule. He had put the interloper in his place. So why did the single, perfect note Leo had played seem to echo in the silent lobby long after the man was gone? And why did the memory of the man's eyes, those calm, deeply knowing eyes, make the victory feel so much like a mistake? The silence Leo left behind was thick and awkward. The few guests in the lounge quickly looked away, picking up their phones or suddenly finding great interest in their coffee cups. Elias stood rooted to the spot for another moment, his finger slowly dropping to his side. The marble floor where he'd promised to kneel seemed to gleam up at him, a silent witness to his outburst. He smoothed his suit jacket, a mechanical gesture, and turned on his heel. The professional mask snapped back into place, but it felt tighter than before, like it didn't quite fit. He offered a thin, placating smile to the room, a manager restoring order, and walked back to his post at the concierge desk. The wind felt sour in his stomach. For the rest of the evening, the incident replayed in his mind. He told himself he'd done the right thing. Rules were rules. The piano was irreplaceable. What if the man had spilled a drink on it? What if he'd broken a key? The logic was sound, airtight. Yet the image of the man's face, that look of deep pity, wouldn't leave him. It wasn't the reaction of a scolded child. It was the reaction of a master watching a novice make a tragic error. Elias busied himself with work, his movements sharp and efficient. He barked a minor correction at a junior staff member about the alignment of the pens on the counter, making the young man flinch. The harshness in his own voice surprised him. He was usually firm, not cruel. He took a deep breath, trying to find his center, the calm control that defined him. It felt just out of reach. He glanced often towards the elevator bank. Part of him, a part he didn't want to acknowledge, half expected the man Leo to come back down. To do what? Apologize again? Challenge him? The lobby remained Leo-free. The night passed. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a big day for the hotel. They were hosting a luncheon and press event in the ballroom for a very important guest, a world-famous concert pianist. The man was not just a client. He was a friend of the hotel's owner and a personal acquaintance of Elias. He was a star, with a cascade of silver hair and a flamboyant style. The exact opposite of the quiet man from the night before. The pianist arrived mid-morning, sweeping into the lobby with an entourage. He wore a long, elegant coat and a silk scarf, his laughter booming off the marble. "Elias, my friend," he called out, embracing the manager with a theatrical clap on the back. "The palace looks magnificent, as always." "It's a pleasure to have you back," Elias said, the genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. This was his world. This was the caliber of person the Grand Royale served. Everything is prepared in the ballroom. The Steinway from the concert hall has been installed and tuned to your specifications. Splendid. But you know, the pianist said, his eyes twinkling, I like to warm up somewhere quiet, get the feel of the day. Mind if I use the old beauty here for a few minutes? He gestured to the lobby's Steinway. Of course, for you anything, Elias said, beaming. This was right. This was proper. A master playing the masterpiece. A staff member hurried to remove the Do Not Touch sign. The pianist sat on the plush bench, flexed his fingers with a dancer's grace, and launched into a complex rippling passage from a Chopin etude. The notes filled the lobby, brilliant and technically perfect. Guests stopped to listen. Phones came out to record. This was a performance. Elias stood a respectful distance away, arms crossed, pride swelling in his chest. This was the sound the piano was meant to make. Then, abruptly, the music stopped. The pianist held a chord, let it fade, and then played a single note middle C. He played it again. And again. He leaned his head close to the strings, listening intently. Elias felt a cold trickle of unease. He walked over. Is everything all right? Is the tone not to your liking? I can call the tuner immediately. The pianist didn't look up. He played the note once more, then a few notes around it, a thoughtful frown on his face. No, it's not that. It's perfect. Surprisingly perfect. He looked at Elias, his expression now one of open curiosity. Your tuner. What's his name? The one who did this piano. Elias blinked. It's the same gentleman we always use. Why? This voicing. The pianist said, speaking more to himself than to Elias. He played a gentle, dreaming scale. The hammers have been needled with such subtlety. The touch is like butter, but with a core of clarity right where it matters. This isn't just a tuning. This is personalization. He swiveled on the bench, his eyes sharp. Elias, who else has played this piano recently? Since the last tuning? The cold trickle in Elias's stomach turned to a flood of ice. He kept his voice even. No one. It's strictly off limits to guests. You know our policy. The pianist stared at him, disbelief plain on his face. That's impossible. This is a specific, beautiful adjustment. It's exactly how... He trailed off, his gaze shifting past Elias's shoulder, scanning the lobby. His eyes, used to picking out details from a crowd, moved over the guests, the staff, the quiet corners, and then they stopped. Elias followed his gaze. Leo had just walked out of the hotel's breakfast restaurant. He was dressed in the same simple sweater and trousers, holding a newspaper. He was heading towards the main doors, perhaps for a walk. Time seemed to slow down. The famous pianist's face underwent a transformation. The curiosity melted into shock. The shock deepened into a kind of reverent awe. His mouth fell slightly open. No, he whispered. Then louder, it can't be. In one fluid motion, he stood up from the piano bench, ignoring the precious instrument behind him. He took a step, then another, his focus laser-sharp on the unassuming man by the door. Maestro? He called out, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Leo paused, turning slowly. He saw the pianist. A flicker of recognition passed over his calm face, followed by a slight, almost imperceptible wince. As if he'd been hoping to avoid this very moment, the pianist broke into a run. Not a walk, not a stride, a genuine, earnest run across the polished marble floor. He closed the distance between them, and to the utter astonishment of everyone in the lobby, including Elias, whose blood had seemingly turned to sludge in his veins, the world-renowned star did something unthinkable. He embraced Leo, not a polite, professional hug, but a full, heartfelt embrace, thumping the older man on the back with familiar affection. Maestro Kovac. Lev, it is you. Everyone thought you were in seclusion in the mountains. What are you doing here? The name, Kovac hit Elias like a physical blow. He knew that name. Every person with even a passing interest in classical music knew that name. Lev Kovac, the pianist's pianist. A legend. A composer whose works were considered modern classics. A teacher so revered that the biggest stars in the world whispered his name with a sort of holy gratitude. He was famously, fiercely private. He hadn't performed publicly in over a decade. There were more photos of Bigfoot and of Lev Kovac in recent years, and he was standing in the Grand Royal lobby, in a beige sweater. Being scolded by the hotel manager for touching a piano, Leo Lev extricated himself gently from the embrace, offering his old student a small, tired smile. A quiet stop. Just a night. I was traveling. But this piano, the pianist exclaimed, gesturing wildly back to the Steinway. The voicing on the middle C. That was you, wasn't it? I knew it. Only you balanced the warmth and the clarity in that way. Lev Kovac gave a faint, almost shy shrug. It was slightly bright. I merely softened it. A habit. The pianist laughed, a sound of pure delight. He turned, his arms still around the maestro's shoulders, and his eyes finally found Elias. The manager was standing frozen, his face a ghastly pale mask. All the pride, all the authority had drained away, leaving behind a hollow shell of dread. The pianist's smile didn't fade, but its quality changed. It became edged with a dawning, horrible understanding. He looked from the terrified manager to the serene, uncomfortable maestro beside him. He remembered the piano, the do-not-touch sign, Elias's strict policies. Elias, the pianist said, his voice now quiet, carrying a weight that filled the entire lobby. You have met my teacher, my friend, Lev Kovac? The words were polite, but the question behind them was devastating. Elias tried to speak. His mouth was desert dry. He managed a strangled sound that was not a word. He saw the previous night's scene replay, not through his own eyes, but through the eyes of the famous pianist, now staring at him in disbelief. He saw himself pointing at the floor. He heard his own voice, sharp and mocking. Asterisk, if you can actually play this thing properly, I will kneel right here. Asterisk, the spot on the marble floor between them seemed to glow with a terrible, accusing light. He didn't need to kneel yet. He was already falling. The world had shrunk to the space between the three of them. The lobby, the guests, the soft background music, it all melted into a silent, blurry haze. Elias could only hear the pounding of his own heart, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. The famous pianist's arm was still draped around Lev Kovac's shoulders, a protective, familiar gesture that screamed of a relationship Elias could barely comprehend. The maestro himself looked resigned. He offered no anger, no triumphant glare. He just stood there, a quiet island in the storm Elias had created. I didn't? Elias's voice was a rasp, barely audible. He cleared his throat, the sound painfully loud in the silence. There was no introduction. Mr. Kovac. Did not mention. He was digging the hole deeper with every word. The pianist, his friend, his VIP, was looking at him not with anger, but with a profound, disappointed sadness. That was infinitely worse. Elias, the pianist said, his tone low and serious, all his earlier boisterousness gone. This man is Lev Kovac. He has played in the great halls of the world. Kings and queens have waited in line to hear him. I waited for 10 years just for the chance to play for him, for a single word of his advice. He paused, letting each sentence land like a hammer. And you told him not to touch a piano? The final question hung in the air. It wasn't an accusation of breaking a rule anymore. It was an accusation of breaking something sacred. Lev Kovac finally spoke, his voice still that calm, gravelly tone. It's all right. He was doing his job. The piano is valuable. He was protecting it. He placed a hand on his former student's arm, a gentle signal to stand down. This mercy was a new kind of torture for Elias. Protecting it from you? The pianist laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Lef, your touch is what gives an instrument its soul. You don't just play them, you awaken them. The maestro gave a small, dismissive wave. It is a beautiful tool. That is all. He then looked directly at Elias. The manager flinched under the gaze. It was not hostile. It was assessing. You spoke of real artists, of a hard piano. He said the words slowly, as if tasting their meaning. An interesting choice of words. Elias wished the marble floor would open up and swallow him whole. Every syllable from last night was now echoing back, dressed in the horrifying new context of who this man truly was. The spell was broken by the ringing of the pianist's phone. He glanced at it, annoyed, then back at his teacher. The press. They are waiting. I must go. He turned to Elias, his professional face returning, but it was cold now, a sheet of ice. We will speak about this later, Elias. Take care of him. Treat him as you would treat. Well, as you should have treated him from the beginning. With a final worried look at Lef Kovac, the pianist was swept away by his waiting assistants, heading towards the ballroom. The lobby slowly buzzed back to life, but the stares lingered. The whispers were palpable. Elias stood before the living legend he had mocked, completely exposed. Sir. Maestro, Elias began again, his mind blank of any script, any protocol for this cataclysm. Leo is fine, the man said. He began to walk, not towards the exit, but towards the quiet lounge area near the piano. It was a quiet command to follow. Elias obeyed, his legs moving like wood. Lef sat in the same armchair he'd occupied the day before. He did not invite Elias to sit. The manager remained standing, a servant awaiting judgment. You are frightened, Lef observed, not unkindly. You think you will lose your job. Elias could only nod. The truth was too immense to voice. That is not my concern, Lef said. He looked at the Steinway. This, however, is your fear of it, your need to put it behind a fence of words. He turned his gaze back to Elias. You see a thing of price. I see a thing of life. It needs to breathe, to be touched, not by everyone, carelessly. But to live behind glass is also a death. He fell silent for a moment, as if listening to a memory. The note you heard me play. Why did it upset you? Elias was taken aback by the question. It was against the rules. It risked damage. Did it sound like damage? Lef asked, his head tilted. No, it was. A pure note. Then your anger was not about the sound. It was about the act. The breaking of your order. Lef leaned forward slightly. You must understand, for someone like me, the sound is the only truth. The rule you made. It silences the truth. It says this beauty is not for you. And you decided, by looking at my clothes, at my suitcase, that I was not worthy of even one note of that truth. Each word was spoken softly, but they carved into Elias with the precision of a scalpel. There was no yelling, no scene, just a devastating explanation of his own failings. I am deeply, deeply sorry, Elias whispered, the words finally finding some genuine ground. It was a terrible mistake, an unforgivable insult. Lef studied him for a long moment. The insult was not to me. I have been called worse by better critics. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. The insult was to the music itself. You used it as a weapon to make yourself feel big. That is the only unforgivable thing. He stood up. Elias felt the final blow was coming. The demand for his resignation. The phone call to the owner. "I will be leaving today," Lev said. "But before I go, I have a request." "Anything," Elias said immediately, desperate for any path to redemption. "Your pianist friend has a studio at the conservatory downtown. He has given me the key. I would like you to meet me there this evening at 7 o'clock. Elias blinked. That was not what he expected. "The conservatory?" "Of course, yes. I will be there." "Good," Lev said. He picked up his newspaper. "We will finish our conversation there, where the rules are different." He walked away, leaving Elias once again standing alone by the silent, gleaming piano. The panic had morphed into a deep, churning dread. What could the maestro possibly want from him at a music conservatory? Was it to humiliate him further? To give him a lecture in front of real students? The hours until 7 o'clock crawled by. Elias moved through his duties like a ghost. He snapped at no one. His orders were quiet, distracted. The story, he knew, was spreading through the staff like wildfire. He saw the sideways glances, the hurriedly looked-away eyes. His authority, built over a decade, had evaporated in a single morning dot at 10 minutes to 7. Heart heavy, Elias drove to the grand old conservatory building. It was a temple of a different kind than his hotel. He gave his name at the security desk and was directed to a small, private studio on the 3rd floor. The halls were mostly empty, the air smelling of old wood, rosin, and dusty paper. He stopped outside the door, labeled Studio 3B. He could hear music. Not the flawless, powerful music from the lobby that morning, but something else. It was fragmented. A few deep chords. A ripple of high notes. A pause. Then the chords again, slightly changed. It sounded like someone thinking aloud, searching. He knocked softly. "Come in." Elias opened the door. The room was spacious but cozy, dominated by another grand piano, this one older, its wood scarred and loved. Sheet music was scattered on every surface. Lev Kovac sat at the piano, but he wasn't performing. He was working. His fingers moved, testing a phrase, scribbling a note on a manuscript pad, then trying it again. He didn't look up. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a worn sofa against the wall. Elias sat, his back straight, watching. He saw the man's complete absorption, the way his whole body listened to the sounds he was creating. The frustration when something didn't fit, the slight nod when it did. This was the reality of a real artist. It wasn't just glory and applause. It was this lonely, relentless work. After what felt like an eternity, Lev stopped. He let the last sound fade completely before he turned on the bench to face Elias. "You made a promise last night," he said simply. Elias's stomach dropped. So this was it. The man had brought him here to force him to kneel in some cruel, private reenactment. He felt his face grow hot with shame. He began to stand. If that is what you require." "Sit down," Lev said, not harshly, but firmly. "I do not require a show. I require understanding." He gestured to the piano. "The promise you made was about playing, about proving skill. You thought it was a game you could not lose. You were wrong." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You will fulfill your promise, but not as a punishment, not as a joke. You will kneel when you understand what you are kneeling for. Not for me, for the thing you tried to lock away." Elias was utterly lost. "I don't understand." "You will," Lev said. He turned back to the piano. "Tomorrow evening, in the lobby. I will play. You will listen. And then, if you hear it, you will keep your word." He began to play the fragmented chords again. His back to Elias, the conversation was clearly over. Elias sat in the quiet studio, the searching, beautiful music swirling around him. The dread was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a terrible, confusing curiosity. What was he supposed to hear? And what would happen if he didn't? The drive back to the hotel was a blur. The old maestro's words echoed in the silent car. Asterisk, you will kneel when you understand what you are kneeling for. It made no sense to Elias. Kneeling was an act of surrender, of defeat, of apology. What else was there to understand? He spent the next day in a state of suspended animation. He performed his duties, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in the quiet studio with the sound of those searching chords. He avoided the lobby piano as if it were radioactive. The do not touch sign was back in place, but it now seemed like a monument to his own foolishness. He thought about calling the owner to preemptively resign. He drafted the email in his head a dozen times, but something held him back. It wasn't hope. It was the need to see it through, to face the full consequence of what he'd done. The maestro had asked him to listen. It was the least he could do before the axe fell. As evening approached on the second day, a strange quiet descended on the hotel. It was a different quiet from the usual lull. It felt expectant. Word had trickled out, not the full story, but enough of a whisper. Something was going to happen with the piano and the manager. The famous pianist had left town, but not before having a long, closed-door conversation with Elias that left the manager looking pale. He had also made a few phone calls. At 10 minutes to 7, people began to gather. Not a crowd, but a small, curious cluster. A few hotel guests who had caught the tense scene 2 nights prior were there, sipping drinks. The head concierge and a couple of senior staff members were present, trying to look busy but clearly waiting. They had been quietly asked to attend. There was also a small group of 3 young people, 2 women and a man, who looked out of place. They carried themselves with the focused energy of musicians, and they spoke in hushed, excited tones. They were students from the conservatory, personally invited by their hero, the famous pianist, who had told them only that they were to witness something rare. Elias stood off to the side, near the concierge desk. He wore his best suit, as if for a funeral. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back to stop them from shaking. He felt every eye glancing at him, then quickly away. He was the specimen under glass now. At exactly 7 o'clock, the main doors opened. Lev Kovac walked in. He was dressed exactly as before, the simple sweater, the plain trousers. He carried nothing. He looked around the lobby, his gaze passing over the small audience without surprise. And finally landing on Elias, he gave the same small, almost imperceptible nod from 2 nights before. He walked to the piano. This time, no one moved to stop him. No one uttered a word. The young music students watched, their eyes wide with reverence. One of them had her hand over her mouth. Lev did not sit down immediately. He stood beside the Steinway and placed a hand on its lid, as if greeting an old friend. Then he opened the fallboard. A soft click was the only sound in the vast space. He sat on the bench, adjusted it slightly, and settled his hands in his lap. He closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath, letting the noise of the world fall away. The first note, when it came, was not what anyone expected. It was not loud, or technically dazzling, or fast. It was a single, low note, deep and resonant, like a bell tolling far under the water. He held it, letting it fill the air, a foundation of sound. Then he added another, a simple interval that created not a melody, but a feeling of vast, empty space, of loneliness. Elias, braced for a storm of music that would crush him with its brilliance, felt disoriented. This was Quiet. Lev began to play in earnest. It was a piece Elias did not recognize. It was slow, achingly so. The left hand painted broad, gentle chords that seemed to support the world. The right hand picked out a simple, folk-like tune above it. But there was nothing simple about the feeling it conveyed. It was a story told in sighs and whispers. It was the sound of twilight in a small village. The sound of memory. The sound of a man sitting alone, thinking of a place he once knew. The music didn't shout. It invited. It didn't demand awe. It asked for empathy. Elias, against his will, felt his shoulders begin to drop. A tight knot of dread in his chest began to loosen, not because the danger was past, but because the music was gently pulling it apart. He watched the maestro's hands. They were not flying over the keys. They were moving with a profound economy, each finger landing with a weight that seemed to draw the sound up from the very heart of the instrument. The piano didn't just make noise under his touch. It spoke. It murmured. It remembered Dot the piece shifted. The lonely melody found a companion, a slightly brighter harmony that spoke of a shared moment, a burst of joy so fragile it brought a tear to the eye of one of the student musicians. Then the memory faded, and the loneliness returned, but changed now. Softened by the remembering Dot, this was not a performance to showcase skill. This was an offering, a sharing of a soul. Lef's face was calm, his eyes distant, seeing the story he was telling in the air before him. He was not playing for the lobby, or for the students, or for the humiliated manager. He was playing because this was the truth of it. This was the music that lived inside the hard piano. And suddenly, Elias began to understand. He thought of his own rules, his polished floors, his perfectly aligned pens. He thought of his need to control, to categorize, to put things and people in their place. He had seen this piano as a possession to be guarded. He had seen the man as a problem to be managed. He had seen everything as a surface, a price tag, a rule, but the music washing over him now had nothing to do with any of that. It was about depth, not surface. It was about feeling, not price. It was about a truth that no rule could ever contain. The maestro was showing him what he had tried to lock away. Not just the piano, but the human experience it could hold. The beauty that doesn't announce itself with fancy clothes or famous names. The art that exists in quiet connection, in a single, pure note of appreciation. The piece drew to a close. The melody returned to its lonely beginning, but now cradled by the richer understanding of all that had come after. The final notes were not chords, but single, spaced-out tones, each one allowed to live and die in the air, leaving a silence that was fuller than the noise before it. Lef's hands came to rest in his lap. The sound faded into a deep, listening quiet. No one clapped. It would have felt like a violation. He opened his eyes. He looked down at the keys for a moment, then slowly turned on the bench. His gaze found Elias. In that moment, the manager finally heard it. Not just the music, but the meaning behind the maestro's request. The promise he had made in arrogance was not about skill. It was about reverence. He had mocked something sacred. And to apologize for that, a simple sorry, was just another form of words, another rule. A true apology required an act of equal weight. Kneeling wasn't about humiliation. It was about lowering yourself before something bigger, about acknowledging that you had been small. Elias's legs moved before his mind could fully command them. He stepped away from the desk. Every eye in the lobby followed him. He walked across the shining marble floor, the sound of his footsteps the only noise in the world. He stopped on the exact spot he had pointed to 2 nights before. He looked at Lef Kovac. He saw no triumph there. Only a patient, deep waiting. Elias Vance, the impeccably dressed manager, the enforcer of order, slowly went down on one knee. The fine wool of his trousers stretched. His knee pressed against the cold, hard marble. He did not bow his head in shame. He kept it up, looking at the maestro, his face pale but clear. "I was blind," he said, his voice strong and carrying in the quiet. It wasn't a whisper. It was a confession. I saw the price, but not the life. I heard a rule, but not the music. He stayed there, kneeling, offering not just an apology, but a testament. He finally understood what he was kneeling for the beauty he had tried to cage, for the arrogance that had made him a jailer, for the profound, simple truth that had been in front of him all along. Dressed in a plain sweater, he was kneeling for the thing he had almost lost forever, his own ability to see. The silence after Elias spoke felt different from all the others. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was deep and respectful, like the quiet in a forest after a long rain. He stayed on one knee, the cold of the marble seeping through his trousers, but he didn't feel the chill. He felt strangely clean, stripped bare, but not broken. From the piano bench, Lev Kovac watched him. The maestro's face softened, the lines around his eyes deepening not with sternness, but with something like relief. He gave a slow, single nod. It was an acceptance, not of an apology, but of an understanding. Then, to the surprise of everyone, Lev stood up. He didn't walk over to accept a surrender. Instead, he walked around the piano and approached Elias. He stopped before the kneeling man and did something simple. He offered his hand. Elias looked at the hand, then up at the maestro's face. He hesitated for a second, then reached out and took it. The maestro's grip was firm, the fingers strong and sure from a lifetime at the keys. He pulled Elias gently to his feet. "Now," Lev said, his voice low, just for the two of them. "Now you can see." He turned and addressed the small gathering for the first time. His voice was still quiet, but it carried. "Thank you for listening. Music needs ears as much as it needs hands." He glanced at the three young students, who were visibly trembling with emotion. "Remember this. The instrument is not a trophy. It is a bridge. Between people. Between hearts." With that, he turned and walked back to the piano. He closed the fallboard over the keys with a gentle, final thud. He did not look at Elias again. He simply nodded to the room and walked across the lobby, out through the main doors and into the evening. Just a man in a simple sweater, disappearing into the city. He was gone. The spell in the lobby broke slowly. The student musicians began whispering fervently to each other, one of them wiping tears from her cheeks. The hotel guests looked at each other, unsure if they should clap or stay quiet. They eventually drifted away, carrying a story they would tell for years. Elias stood rooted to the spot, the feeling of the maestro's hand still warm in his. The staff lingered, unsure what to do. The head concierge finally approached, his expression concerned. "Sir, are you? What should we—" Elias took a deep breath. He looked at his employee, really looked at him, seeing the worry in his eyes. "It's all right," Elias said, and for the first time in days, his voice sounded like his own. "Thank you. You can all return to your duties." He walked back to his office, not with the stiff, defeated stride of the past 2 days, but with a new, thoughtful pace. He closed the door and sat at his desk. The computer screen glowed, his email open to the half-written resignation letter he'd never sent. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he selected all the text and pressed delete. The blank page stared back at him. He wasn't going to resign. Running away would be just another form of not understanding. The maestro hadn't stayed to punish him or to get him fired. He had stayed to teach him. To leave now would be to ignore the lesson. The next morning, Elias arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. He went straight to the maintenance office and found the craftsman who took care of the hotel's fine woodwork. Together, they discussed a small project. A few hours later, Elias stood before the lobby Steinway. In his hands, he held a new sign. It was made of the same rich, dark wood as the piano's music stand. The lettering was elegant, but clear. It did not say, "Do not touch." It read, asterisk, asterisk, "Play with respect. A moment of beauty is welcome." Asterisk, asterisk, he placed it carefully on the piano's lid. He then found the head concierge and gave a new standing instruction. The piano was not to be treated as a forbidden relic. If a guest, any guest, approached it with a genuine intent to child with wonder, an adult with a hesitant smile, they were not to be shooed away. A staff member was to be nearby, not as a guard, but as a steward, to ensure care was taken. The rule was no longer fear. It was mindful appreciation. The change did not happen overnight. Old habits were strong, but Elias changed first. He began to walk through the lobby differently. His eyes still scanned for problems, but they also stopped to see people. He noticed the elderly couple who came every Tuesday for tea, not because they spent much, but because they loved the view. He learned the name of the woman who ran the flower cart outside. He stopped judging worth by the label on a suitcase. A week after the maestro left, the famous pianist called. Elias took the call in his office, his heart pounding again. But for a different reason. "I heard," the pianist said, his voice unreadable. "I don't know what you heard," Elias began, ready to explain. "I heard you listened," the pianist interrupted. "He told me." He said, "The manager has better ears than I thought." That, from him, is a greater compliment than any review I've ever received. Elias was silent, overwhelmed. He also said, the pianist continued, his tone lighter now, that the piano's tone is still perfect. "So your job is safe. For me, at least. But I think you learned more than how to keep a job, yes?" "Yes," Elias said, the word full of meaning. "I did." Life at the Grand Royale settled into a new rhythm. The story of the kneeling manager and the secret maestro became part of the hotel's lore, told in hushed tones by staff to new hires. It was a lesson in humility for everyone. One afternoon, a few months later, Elias was walking through the lobby. He saw a young boy, maybe 7 years old, standing by the piano. The boy was with his mother, dressed in clean but simple clothes tourists on a budget. The boy was staring at the keys, his fingers twitching at his sides. Elias watched. A junior staff member, a new girl, saw the boy and took a step forward, a polite but firm expression on her face. Elias caught her eye and gave a small, deliberate shake of his head. He nodded towards the boy. The staff member paused, confused, and understood. She stepped back and simply watched. The boy looked at his mother, who smiled and nodded. He reached out a single finger, just like the maestro had, and pressed down on a key. A bright, high note sang out. The boy's face lit up with a dazzling, pure joy. He pressed another, then another, making a little cluster of sound. It wasn't music. It was discovery. The mother looked around, slightly embarrassed, ready to pull her son away. Her eyes met Elias's. He was standing a little way off, not intervening. He smiled at her, a genuine, warm smile, and gave a slight nod of encouragement. The mother relaxed. She let her son explore for another minute, his small hands creating a clumsy, happy noise that was the most beautiful sound in the lobby that day. Elias didn't hear a rule being broken. He didn't see a risk to an asset. He saw a bridge being built. He saw a seed being planted. He saw the life in the thing he had once tried to lock away. He walked back to his office, the simple, joyful notes fading behind him. On his desk, the polished surface was still orderly. The pens were aligned, but the order no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the calm space in which beautiful, unexpected things could happen. He had learned that true luxury wasn't in excluding people to protect things. It was in creating a space where people could, even for a moment, touch something beautiful, and in doing so, be reminded of the beauty within themselves. The manager had kept his job, but the man had learned how to listen. And now he finally understood the music.